Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm Andrea Corbillon, and next to John Carpenter, we did this study in the distributed peer review for the proposals, or the results basically of the rankings in the proposal review process. Well, let me start with a little bit of background. ALMA stands for the Atacama Large Millimeter and Submillimeter Array. I'm confident to say that it is the most powerful radio telescope on Earth. I don't want to say in the best of my knowledge because I really think that it is. And it is located in the northern region of Chile. ALMA was born and continued to be part of an international partnership between Europe, North America, East Asia, and Chile. The countries that you see between parentheses are the countries that are represented by the regions, because the region is not necessarily all the continent that is mentioned. As other astronomical observatories, in ALMA we conduct a yearly call for proposals where we invite the astronomical community to present their projects, or what we call a proposal, to use our facility. Yearly, we receive more than 1,700 projects, and they come from all over the world. So with this high demand, we really need to rely on our community to evaluate these projects and tell us which are the most scientifically compelling. So we conduct a peer review process. Particularly, our peer review process has evolved throughout the years. We started opening to observations back in 2011. And from then to now, we moved from a single anonymous process where the authors of the proposal didn't know the identity of the reviewers, but the reviewers knew the identity of the proposers, to a dual anonymous process where no one knew the identity of the other. This change was motivated by some systematics that we were seeing in the final results. And we started to move to this other process little by little. In 2016, we started by informing our reviewers about the systematics that we were seeing. And then we started to remove the information of the proposals that we were providing to the reviewers. And in 2019, we decided to randomize the list of proposers, so the identity of the principal investigator wasn't clear to the reviewers. And we also hide the gender of the proposers by just presenting their first name or the first letter in the first name next to their last name. So 2019 was a transition year. But then in 2021, we went fully into the dual anonymous process. Another change that we did was that we transitioned from the usual topical panel process to a distributed peer review one, where the same proposers have to review the proposals that are submitted. And this particular change was motivated by the workload that the panel process had over the panelists. Sometimes there were panelists that had to review 100 or 150 proposals in a period of 1 month, so next to their usual duties, so it was a high workload. And we tried to address this issue over the years by increasing the number of panels and increasing the number of panelists, but we couldn't address the issue, so we shifted to this distributed peer review process. In our study, we analyzed the proposal review results, as I mentioned, specifically the scientific rankings of the proposals, to assess the possible impact of the changes that I just mentioned. Particularly, we focused on studying the proposal ranks versus the ALMA region of the principal investigator. And with this, I mean the region of the institution of which this principal investigator is associated. Also, the gender and the level of expertise in using ALMA of the principal investigator. Here in this plot, you can see the distribution of the ALMA projects of the principal investigators, but the different ALMA regions and their genders. And the whole universe of, or the number of individual principal investigators that we have, and the number of proposals that we have up until 2025. In the next slides, I will present you our results. But first, I would like to explain a little bit how they are presented. These are cumulative distributions that will be presented by region, gender, and a level of expertise. And the key to interpret these plots is to look at the alignment of the curves. If there are two curves that are closely aligned, that means that the final result for both of that groups is similar. Whereas if there is a gap between the curves, then it means that there is a difference in the final results of those groups. Particularly if a curve goes up to the upper left, it means that that group had better overall ranks than the other groups. And if the curve goes down to the lower right, it means that that group had a overall poorer ranks than the rest of the population that is presented. Well, in terms of the ALMA regions, here we see the cumulative distributions for the ranks of the East Asian principal investigators in orange and the European principal investigators in blue. You can see that from cycle 0 to cycle 7, there is a considerable gap between both curves, indicating that during that time, European proposals had better ranks than the East Asian proposals. Then in cycle 8, when we introduce the dual anonymous and the distributed peer review, we start to see that this gap between the both groups starts to decrease. And particularly in cycle 11, which was in 2024, there was no significant gap between these two regions. I do not present here North America and the Chilean curve because there were no major changes in both of those populations. North America always have the better ranks, and Chilean proposals usually have the poorer ranks. Well, in terms of the gender of the principal investigators, we see that there is no trend that could indicate that proposals led by one gender do better than the proposals led by a principal investigator of the other gender. We see, though, that in cycle 3 and in cycle 10, there is a small gap or a small tendency that projects led by men did better than the ones led by women. But the difference is just marginal. We cannot draw any clear conclusion from that. Related to the experience of the project lead, well, here is important to tell you that we define the experience of a user by the number of times that they have presented or submitted a proposal to ALMA as principal investigator. So someone who is experienced is someone who has submitted a proposal for every single cycle. And well, we do not present here cycle 0 because by definition, everyone were new users back then. Here we can see two things. One, which is the strongest and most persistent trend, is that the first-time users, the first-time principal investigators shown in the red curve, have always poorer ranks than the rest of the population. And this is independently of the anonymity level of the proposals or of the type of review process that we were conducting. Then the other trend that you can see here is that from cycle 1 to cycle 6, the users who had the more experience, which is the blue curve, constantly had better ranks than the rest of the population. But in cycle 7, that if you remember, is that transition cycle where we hide the identity of the principal investigator and the gender as well, we started to see that the results of the most experienced principal investigators start to do as better as or equally as the ones from the intermediate experienced PIs. So now which are the next steps in our analysis? Well, the first one is to collect more information about our users because we do not have a complete database on gender, for example, or on their seniority. So we are collecting that data now. And also to take into account, for instance, changes in the demographic over the years from one cycle to the other, and the possible intersection biases that could be related to these changes. And that could clarify some of the findings that we were seeing. And in conclusion, well, we analyzed the proposal review results after implementing some changes in terms of the anonymity of the process and on the process itself. And we could see that there were no clear differences between, or in terms of region, we only could see differences in the final results of the East Asian projects. In terms of gender, there was no clear tendency. And in terms of the experience of the principal investigators, we could see that the less experienced PIs always have the poorer ranks, whereas the most experienced PIs started to do equally to the medium experienced PIs. And but we cannot say that any of these changes are particularly produced by the introduction of dual anonymous or by the introduction of the distributed peer review, because we introduced these two major changes at the same time. So we cannot pinpoint one of them as the consequence or the reason of these changes that we were seeing. With that, I finish. Thank you very much for listening.
Questions? One at the back of the room.
Hi there, Nick DeVito, University of Oxford. So I'm curious if you considered testing this before you implemented it. Like, was there a reason, or like, did you consider it, or did you just look back retrospectively and say, oh, let's assess how this worked out? You know, was there a reason you couldn't have tried this as an intervention and kind of saw how it went and maybe found out some causality? Maybe.
Well, yeah, there is no much room to test, but we did started to implement at least a distributed peer review in a smaller call for proposals. I think that it was 1 year before we implemented it fully on the big call for proposal that we have. So that was sort of our test. And yeah, but a proper test, we didn't manage to, or we didn't do it.
You didn't like randomize or anything like that?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here.
Felicitaciones, Andrea.
Thank you.
I don't know if you attended the session that I moderated yesterday.
Yeah.
I was just, I would like to recommend for you to look into the equalizer system that was applied in other countries to see whether we can bring up the participation, the share of Chilean research proposals that are funded and their quality as well. I think it is this data is important also to take a look at how we take care of our own scientific capital.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea, for your research.
Thank you for that suggestion. Thanks.
We'll go remote questions.
Yes, thank you. Bahar Memani of Elsevier again wonders why you introduced the two new policies at the same time and how you can disentangle those effects.
Well, I think that it was a mixture of things. If you remember correctly, in 2020, we were in the pandemic. So we sort of, well, we were planning to go into this dual anonymous process way before the pandemic and to move into the distributed peer review before the pandemic as well. But with the pandemic, we skipped one call for proposals. So because the observatory was shut down. So the natural thing was that after that transition year in 2019, we moved to a dual anonymous process. So that was one thing. In terms of the distributed peer review, well, we sort of accelerate the decision of including in our big call for proposals after this whole situation of the pandemic. Yeah. So it was sort of coincidental.
Yeah, thank you.
John?
Extremely interesting presentation. I'm wondering whether what you see is also a reflection of some sort of homophily between reviewers and people who propose. We've seen that in many other fields that people like things that align to their own work, and if the major change that I saw between step and 1, 2 is actually the fact that you go from 150 reviewers to 1,700, more than 10 times more. So you probably dilute any such effects of these are some dominant themes and senior investigators, very experienced, who drive the show and get more of the same type of research being supported to be done. Could that be an issue? And along the same lines, I'm completely clueless about how the field works, but is it research proposals that can really be anonymized? Or is that impossible? For example, in some fields, in other domains that I know, even if you try to blind and anonymize everything, you know who is behind this, because there's only one team or maybe two teams that do this, or the style is such, or the focus. There's some hallmarks. So I don't know. And this seems to be a fairly small number of occupants field. And I would suspect that probably this sort of lack of ability to blind and anonymize would be an issue.
Yeah, well, related to your first question, that is how the population has changed over the different cycles is something that we need to take into account in our study and see the impact of those changes, whereas is the number of reviewers that we have. That back then when we had the panel meetings, we had to invite the reviewers, so they were selected by us, whereas now it's just the same community that is proposing is the one that is reviewing. So that is something that we need to take into account, is one of our next steps. Related to your second question, and that is in fact one of the concerns of our community or niche groups, is about the anonymity of the group. Well, in that case, we have a set of guidelines to anonymize the projects. And we know that for this small group of people who are, I don't know, study a particular specific object, that all groups know to each other. And we tell them that while at least the proposal is following our guidance for anonymization, it's okay. And on the reviewer side, we tell them to focus on the scientific merit of the proposal. I know that it's difficult to separate both things because you are unconsciously biased by your knowledge, but we try to guide them into that direction, that please focus on the scientific merit. Don't think of the proposer team. Again, it's hard, but that's the way we have been addressing this issue.
Time for one more. Rachel Klaus from Royal Roads University in British Columbia thanks you for the interesting presentation and is curious whether the criteria used to evaluate proposals have changed over time at ALMA. And if you can, what are those criteria and how are they defined?
Well, the criteria per se haven't changed that much. Maybe we have made our documentation clearer so that the reviewers can understand better which are the aspects of a proposal they need to review. But from the times of the panel meetings, which I arrived to ALMA in cycle 3, up until now, the criteria has been almost the same. Yeah, no, the same. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.